So my name is Sean Ahlquist. I'm from the University of Michigan, a professor in architecture. We're developing interactive textiles in 3D multisensory environments, and these are being designed for children with autism to help develop skills with social interaction. So a focus is looking at issues that children with autism have related to sensory processing. So this can result in a muted sense of touch and also lead to poor fine and gross motor skills. We're looking though to see how this contributes to issues with social participation. In comparison to other children who have disabilities, you can see children with autism, for example, may be least likely to invite into social activities. Our response is to design and engineer these large-scale 3D textile structures and transform them into essentially interactive environments. The key, though, in understanding the function is actually this girl, and she's really good at introducing herself. So Ada is our initial inspiration. She has autism. She also happens to be my daughter. So here we can see a challenge in terms of stacking these blocks. The issue is what's called grading of movement, the inability to apply the right pressure for a certain activity. Our response essentially is to generate something like a big, stretchy textile iPad. So depending on how much pressure you apply, it influences the color that you're actually projecting onto the surface. We also want to recognize some of Ada's sensory preferences, like something like a confined environment, or a very grand sensory experience like swinging on the jungle gym. So we take that textile interface and make it into a three-dimensional structure. In this case, touching the surface at key points activates these animations to be projected. Ada chose to adventure this in a unique way, taking a nosedive through the structure. We also want to look at a more close and dynamic interaction with the surface. In this case, a quick touch actually disturbs these swarm of fish. In another case, a long touch actually makes them attract to that point of interaction. There's also a sound component of a series of chimes which get triggered with that interaction. Again, Ada tested the structure, but we met our motto, never underestimate the destructive power of the little darlings. So, from a technology standpoint, it's fairly elaborate. These textile structures are utilized with a Microsoft Kinect and a projector. We develop our own software to capture interaction with the surface through the Kinect. And then also we can design any kind of interface to layer on top of that, also capturing the diagnostics for how people interact with it. Our team is quite interdisciplinary, very unique. It's architecture combined with psychiatry as well as kinesiology. That helps us form the design, of course, but most critically, it helps us determine the ways in which we can assess the performance of the prototypes. This leads us to a pilot study, which we're initiating now with 4 or 5 children at the center that my daughter goes to. We'll assess the motor capabilities of the students before and after the pilot study, but also capture the various ways in which they're interacting with the surface. Another prototype is sort of going on tour. We're taking it to various locations and just seeing how children actually interact with it. What are their kind of preferred ways of interaction and experience? The impact is to really develop these motor and social skills by magnifying the sensory experience and positively reinforcing that social interaction. But as one collaborator told us, that really, just make technology that involves fun with people. With that, thank you.
I love this. This is a really interesting way to think about material for other types of communities. Have you thought about doing this with other types of disabilities or making this accessible for other types of communities outside of autism?
I think there's certainly that opportunity, but we kind of don't want to jump forward too quickly until we can actually kind of find some proof that we are being effective with that initial audience.
I think it's an amazing project, and I'd wonder, like, how do you work with the psychologists to gather that data? How's that data gathered? How's it implemented? How's it?
Sure. I mean, that's what we're developing now. I mean, fortunately, the professor she's from psychiatry, Costanza Columbi, Her expertise is in how to measure forms of social interaction in a kind of, in some sort of trial or human behavior study. So I can't speak towards her expertise, but that was kind of the idea with bringing together this interdisciplinary team. It's the same with the kinesiologists. They themselves have actually formed and tested the tools of measurement that are used essentially worldwide. So we bring in their expertise, as I mentioned, to kind of be able to provide the right tools for measurement.
I guess, well, you have a very wonderful daughter, by the way, very charming, and I love that you have a very targeted user, right? It's like very easy to say that technology works for everyone. Everyone's going to adopt it, but actually that you're super focused and on a big need and potentially big impact area. I guess I'm wondering, with that impact, obviously, if children can learn how much pressure to apply and stuff, how much do you feel like that might change their life or change their trajectory?
So, one challenge is to speak of it in a very broad manner. I mean, there's a common phrase with autism: when you've met one person with autism, you've met that one person with autism. So the conditions are very, very unique. So, I can speak on a more specific level. The sensory system is actually quite critical in forming appropriate social interactions. Even if you just talk about the kind of physical, the tactile sensory system. If you want to have just some sort of touch, with a person, if you don't understand the amount of pressure that you're applying, that touch could either be too gentle, which means you're not attracting the right attention, or it could be too tough, which is in the case of my daughter, and you kind of get a whack in the head, or you get a grab of an arm, or a pull of the hair, or something like that. So, and basically that's a fundamental issue with the sensory system itself. So if through these experiences, just through routine and our kind of compensation of those limitations, if through routine they can understand like, oh, that is what grading of movement is, then hopefully that kind of sensory aspect of social interaction can actually be tackled and developed.
So to build on that, you talked about this very specific user group. So do you see that this starts to apply and is useful as children get older, or really is only in a narrow age range of like 3 to 8, or expand on that?
Yeah, I mean, that is our age range at the moment, 3 to 8, and it mostly has to do with the therapy center that we're working with. Those are just the kids that they tailor to, or that they work with. And a lot of my expertise in that area just comes from my daughter, and she happens to be 7 years old right now. So as she progresses, then I'm sure how this affects that older age range will start to come into play as well.
Thank you.